again. Good afternoon, everybody. I was asked if I would make myself available for you all for a few minutes this afternoon, and I thought I would do that. Last time, as you recall, we did it in the hallway on the first floor. That was a little bit chaotic with people walking through us as we were talking, so I thought we'd be a little better off up here. So with that, you just heard me speak for a few minutes, and I'll just take questions.
Governor, you said that you had not gotten all of the numbers in from the legislative fiscal office from this special session. How have you and Commissioner of Administration Jay Darden been able to do the revisions needed for HB1 to reflect?
Well, simply put, we have, excuse me, we haven't been able to do that yet. House Bill 122 was the supplemental appropriations bill, which actually effectuated cuts, and then House Bill 61 and 62 were the two primary revenue bills of the session. So we don't have any of those three bills in their enrolled forms, and so they haven't been scored yet. That makes it impossible to deal with real numbers. Now, we certainly know that we have a mid-year cut on top of House Bill 122, somewhere in the $30 million to $60 million range. We quite literally do not know yet whether it's 30 million or 60 million, and that makes a huge difference because it looks like at a minimum, since I've been governor, including the 30 million figure, we will have cut state government in the mid-year by over $200 million. That additional 30 million makes a huge difference. So that's important. And clearly we need to know what sort of revenue we raise both for the current year and next year. It helps us to know for sure what sort of additional cuts or preparations we have to make. And as of right now, Commissioner Darden is unable to continue, or I should say to finish, his preparation of his budget submission. Because while we already presented our initial executive budget proposal to the legislature, now that we are going to have new revenue, and I know REC meets Wednesday, we don't know until then what new revenue will be recognized, and we're going to have to go in and present a set of amendments to the legislature so that rather than the budget reflecting a $2 billion shortfall, it'll reflect only an $800 million shortfall. And I say only tongue-in-cheek. That's a huge number. Yes, sir?
Governor, when we decide whether or not to call a special session, how do you plan to address this $800 million cut?
Well, first of all, the budget hasn't, we have no choice. The budget that gets passed in this session can only incorporate recognized revenue. And so there will be a budget at the end of the day that comes out of this session that will cut $800 million in state general fund compared to what we had for the year that we're in currently. I don't believe a special session prior to the end of the regular session is legal, so we can't have it before then. But I will be in consultation with the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, and other leaders to figure out exactly when that session should be called. I don't doubt that a session is going to be necessary, because I think when people start actually putting the numbers down on paper and trying to move it around and come up with a responsible budget, they're going to find out you cannot adequately fund what we all believe to be critical priorities when you short $800 million. That reality has not set in on enough members yet. It will set in at some point. Will it happen before the cuts are actually made and the pain starts? You know, I hope it will. We're going to have to see. But Greg, there won't be any options on the table in the next special session that are any more appetizing than those that were on the table during the recently concluded special session. So we have to have some change with respect to some members of the House if we're going to be effective, and that's part of the calculus as well.
Governor, on your charter school proposal, as you know, the charter school advocates always say that their child can be in an A or B district but be attending a school with C, D, or F. Can you address that point and what you're hoping to do?
Well, what I'm hoping to do is restore more local control over education to locally elected school boards. When you have a school system that under our accountability system has an A or a B letter grade, I believe that they ought to have more autonomy. and they ought to decide for themselves whether a new charter school is going to open. When a charter school opens, then that's where money is spent and kids are educated. And for districts that have proven themselves capable of delivering quality education, they ought to be in charge of that decision. So it is as simple as that. And I will tell you that even in those districts that have an A or a B letter grade, if the charter proposal is to take over a failing school, and that proposal is rejected by the local school board, then Bessie would still have the authority to go and revisit that and potentially authorize that school. Tyler?
Governor, you spoke in very diplomatic terms today to the legislature. Is it hard to hold your tongue with the feeling that they're not doing their job properly?
Well, you just described to me a feeling that I haven't expressed to you. Or at least not today. No. Look, it was a tough special session, and it's going to be a tough regular session, and our next special session is going to be tough. I've spent 8 years in the legislature. I know what it's like to be asked to do something by a governor who you have disagreements with. And so I have members of the House who are not comfortable with my proposals. My frustration really was with a relatively small number of legislators, primarily in the House, but not exclusively, who refused to either vote for new revenue or identify the cuts that they would stand by and endorse and say, rather than voting for revenue, this is what I propose to do, and to close that shortfall. Because when you have a constitutional requirement to balance the budget and you have record deficits, then you've got to be willing to do one of three things. You've got to raise revenue, cut spending, or do a combination of both. And for those people who wouldn't do anything, they were part of the problem. And so it is frustrating. And those folks, I believe, are soon to understand just how big the problem is, what the implications are when they start trying to fashion a budget that adequately funds our priorities, and they don't have $800 million in state general fund that they will need just to have the services next year that we had this year. That is a huge number, and it's going to impact every area of our budget. And so was I frustrated? I guess I was. If you talk to them, some of them were probably frustrated with me. But I will tell you, the way the legislature conducted its business on Wednesday, especially late on Wednesday, really came up short. It was a disservice to the people of Louisiana. There was nothing new. We should not have had that much back and forth and uncertainty. I mean, here we are the following Monday in our regular session, and the fiscal office hasn't even been able to score the bills that were passed in the last minutes of that session. I don't have the enrolled bills to sign into law yet, and that has to happen before REC can recognize any revenue to be incorporated into the budget. And so that's why I said downstairs that it was both the process that was lacking and the end result.
When do you anticipate getting those enrolled bills?
Well, I'm told that I might have them this afternoon, and I hope that I do, because quite literally there's not many people who know what the enrolled bills actually look like. And you know, for example, I am especially concerned that House Bill 122 was going to cut corrections again. Well, corrections is a state general fund agency. It doesn't receive other types of funding, and it needed a $14.5 million supplemental appropriation, which it's not going to get because we don't have the revenue for the supplemental appropriation, and that's why it was not on my list that I submitted to the legislature of agencies that should be cut again. And so I am concerned that House Bill 122 will have a significant cut to corrections and a few other entities. And while I have the ability to exercise a line item veto on those cuts, everything that I cut adds to every cut that I veto adds to the cuts that I have to make somewhere else. And so it's not a great exercise to engage in, but the sooner we can get the bills on my desk, the sooner we can start doing that and provide the stability and the certainty, I should say, that we all need. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think with an $800 million hole that you all will be able to fund TOPS the way it's been funded in the past?
Well, first of all, I don't believe we're going to fund much of anything the way it's been funded in the recent past. And, you know, whether it's health care with respect to private partners, whether it's maybe optional Medicaid services and other things, higher education, the TOPS program, the Department of Corrections, K through 12. You know, I don't know that there will be the money, and certainly doesn't appear that there will be the money necessary to pass the resolution that came from Bessie on the MFP that would seek to incorporate the $44 million that was appropriated last year outside of the formula, but put it into the formula this year. I don't believe that $44 million is going to be there. So I don't see much of an opportunity to fund any of our priorities to the degree that they were funded previously. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, I'm sorry I missed the beginning. It sounds as though you were definitively saying you expect a second special session. And I guess I'm wondering, what do you tell higher education and agencies that are going to go through this whole process with one budget scenario and may not know until June what their budget looks like on July 1st?
Well, Melinda, they know pretty well what their budget's going to look like now. They're going to have to make preparations for cuts based upon the number that they're going to be given by the Commissioner of Administration. That's going to happen as soon as we have enough certainty around the numbers. But we do know that that shortfall is in the neighborhood of $800 million. And they are not going to be able to wait. I've been telling you all, and I've been telling the legislature for weeks, that whatever revenue we came out of the special session with, that's what was going to be taken into account by higher education and state agencies as they move forward in anticipation of next year. Those decisions are going to have to be made very quickly. And, you know, even though they make decisions, they're going to be painful. I can certainly believe that the higher education community, because that's what you asked about specifically, would still be hopeful for another special session whenever it might come that would restore some or all of the funding that they're going to be cut. Now, I do believe a second special session this year is more likely than not. The timing of that special session is yet to be determined. The call for that special session is obviously yet to be determined, but I will be making those decisions in consultation with the leadership in the House and the Senate, and quite frankly, rank and file members as well, to determine what their appetite is and when they get hungry.
So should agencies hold out hope for that, or are you, I guess I'm wondering what advice you would give them at this point? Just make the cuts and maybe you'll get money later?
Well, we're not going to have any choice but to make the cuts. And again, that's why I was so, what was the word that somebody asked me about earlier? No, I was, frustrated with some members of the House and the Senate earlier in the special session is because they didn't seem to get the urgency of the situation. They weren't going to have the luxury of waiting and coming back thinking that the cuts weren't going to be implemented in the meantime, because that's just the way we have to move forward. Yes, sir.
Governor, can you just, with all this talk of another special session, can you just talk about the difference between a special session and a regular session, and why you would expect anything different after the end of this regular session?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a good question, and that's why I haven't said definitively that I will call one or when or what the call would actually look like. Obviously, we cannot raise revenue in the session that started today. So if we want to restore funding for state agencies for higher education, we're going to have to do that in another special session. Quite frankly, there won't be any options on the table in a second special session that are more appetizing than those that were on the table in the first special session. And that's another reason why I was frustrated. It's not like things are all of a sudden going to be easy. There's only so many different ways to raise revenue or to cut spending. We're going to go through the exercise of fashioning a budget. So whatever spending cuts are going to happen are going to happen. But then I think people are going to quickly realize, including some who did not vote in support of revenue the first time, that we have to raise revenue. And we will come back in a second special session at the appropriate time and make that happen. That would be my hope. But between now and then, there will be unnecessary pain visited on the state of Louisiana. Pain that could have been avoided had we done our job the first time around.
One last question, Governor.
Beth, you'll get it.
You spoke about changing the whole capital outlay process.
Yeah.
And in many instances, it appears that their buildings are leaking on higher education,
Yeah.
campuses, and yet then they're building new buildings. So how do you anticipate changing that?
Well, first of all, that's a great question. Through capital outlay, for the most part, we are borrowing money to build things and we pay it back over time. It doesn't make sense when you don't have operational budgets at state agencies and higher education institutions to operate the buildings they currently have, to keep borrowing money to build new buildings that they're then going to have to insure, they're going to have to heat and cool, maintain, staff. We don't have that kind of money, but at the same time, we have state-owned buildings and higher education buildings that really require a lot of maintenance because of leaky roofs, because of heating and cooling systems, whatever. And so I think the better way to spend money now is on maintaining those buildings that we have. And so that will be the focus of the capital outlay program. The good news is that it also happens to be the highest priority for the Board of Regents in terms of higher education. They weren't going to ask this year anyway for any new construction projects on higher education campuses that aren't already in the program. So in addition to deferred maintenance, which while it's not sexy, if you want to see the need for deferred maintenance, go to Southeastern and see what happened this weekend. Go to Grambling and see what happened this weekend. And so we need to do that. It's just a prudent way to spend money, especially right now. Secondly, I believe we need to spend, and I've said this for years now, more of the capital outlay program on transportation. An additional 25% overall of the capital outlay program ought to be on transportation needs, and we should get away from these small projects that benefit really small areas but don't have a statewide impact. Now, why is this necessary? It's necessary because the operating budgets are not what they should be, but also because we have a capital outlay program that in and of itself is hundreds of millions of dollars overcommitted. We have projects in the program that add up to hundreds of millions of dollars more than we can borrow to fund anyway. And so we need to call a lot of those projects out. They're never going to see the light of day. And we need to do that just so that we can regain control over the capital outlay bill. And we're going to do that. I've already instructed, in fact, did so weeks ago, Jay Darden to start taking that look. And look, I understand exactly what I'm doing. It's very difficult for a governor to do this with the capital outlay bill because that capital outlay bill is how they interact with legislators and turn votes around on certain matters. But that's not a luxury that we have. And you know, I said during the campaign that that's not the way I intended to use capital outlay anyway. So with that, I want to thank y'all very much. Hopefully we will have a slower operations tempo in this 3-month regular session than we had in the 3-week special session. We will be making ourselves or myself available to you all periodically, and hopefully that'll be a beneficial exchange. Thank y'all.